here we are in layout. I'll go into the perspective view so we can have a look at our little rocket ship. Probably something better than a wireframe. Like a shaded solid would be nice. So here's all our bits and pieces in here, and we need to rig them up. So to begin with, let's do what's most obvious first, and that is we'll look at our scene editor first, and we'll see that the parenting that we put in here is already active, and that's pretty nice. We have a rocket ship body, and it has a gear leg and a gear foot, so one of each. We're going to clone them out later. And we have a rocket ship hinge, which is in position, and actually the hatch, we didn't do this, we should have parented the hatch to the hinge. We'll just do that now, drag it on there. And the hatch handle is parented to the door. We have outer wings parented to inner wings. So the first thing is, let's grab our two inner wings, and let's make sure our pivot point is in the correct place. So I'll go simply to a side view, and I'm actually going to go into wireframe mode, and I want to move the pivot point so it's right in the center of here. So go over to my Modify tab, move pivot, drag this down until it's properly centered. I'm going to zoom right in there, make sure it is right on, and it is not quite right on here. You want to zoom in pretty far, you want to be as precise as you can. And I think that's about as precise as we're going to get. And now we should see, when we go into our perspective view and rotate these guys, that they rotate properly. And the outer wings are parented to them, so they seem to be rotating very nicely. Again, let's look in our shaded solid view and see that. Yeah, so you can see the outer cone is lined up very nicely with the inner part of the cone. It seems to be rotating quite nicely. We'll just set that back to 0 degrees. Now the only axis we want these things rotating on is their pitch. We definitely don't want to accidentally be rotating them on other pivots, because that just totally breaks it. So the easy way to make sure that doesn't happen accidentally is just go over here and turn off heading and bank. Now the other handles aren't even available in the window. There's no way you can rotate it other than on pitch. So now we want to grab our outer wings and go back into wireframe view. We're going to do the same thing. Go back to side view and move the pivot point again. Again, we wanted to get it right on this point here. So we're going to slide it down to get it on as close as we can. Zoom in again. Get as precise as we possibly can. I think that's the extent of our precision there. So now when we go back into perspective view and zoom out, and again go back to our shaded solid, rotate this once again. There's our problem. We want to again make sure that only pitch is controllable, and that's working quite nicely. Now additionally, we want to make sure that it doesn't move, so we'll just turn off the X, Y, and Z channels, and we also want to make sure that it doesn't scale, so we'll turn off those scale channels as well. Let's go back and just do that with the inner wings as well. We want to turn off the scale, make sure they can't be inadvertently scaled, and we'll turn off the move channels to make sure they can't be accidentally moved. Now whenever you select this thing, no matter what you're in, you cannot do anything except rotate it, unless you do it in the graph editor, of course. Now, here's an interesting idea. It just occurred to me that we might want the outer wings to rotate completely independently of the inner wings. That might be kind of an interesting little rig feature. Might allow us to add a little bit of extra personality to this rocket ship. So I'm actually going to unparent these from the outer wings, and I'm going to parent them directly to the body. So they're still in exactly the same position, but now when I move, for example, the inner wing, the outer wing can move completely independently in a different direction. Who knows why, but it might. And that gives us a little bit more fun animation opportunity. So it's not what I originally thought. I originally thought it would be parented in, but I think this is more interesting. Now, one of the things I also like to do when I'm rigging is I love to color code things. I think color coding is a really great way to quickly glance at your scene editor and find out how things work. So I like to use the age-old method of making right things red and left things green. Red is right. It's easy to remember. So all we have to do is left click right on the color to go red. Very simple. And we'll make the left ones green. So let's go ahead and do the job of putting the hatch in place. Move this up and out so we can actually see it. Let's center on it so we can get right in there, get it well positioned next to this handle here. I'm just going to close the scene editor for the moment. Just want to get right in there. And let's actually take a side view so we can try to rotate this angle in here. I think I actually need to rotate my light. Let me go back to my object. I have my focus on right here, so I want to turn it off so that when I select my light, I don't lose my focus. And I just want to rotate my light around so I can see a little bit better here. Okay. So my object, I want to rotate it on its pitch. And I want to move it in carefully, try to get it to fit with these hinges. Okay, now I'm going to take a back view and move it over till it aligns with the hinges. And I'm going to go into a perspective view to see if it doesn't look like it's quite lining up here. Looks like my rotation angle isn't quite right. I need a little bit finer scale here. Just use my square brackets to change my scale, and then I can move things a little bit more finely. You may notice I'm really carefully moving things on one axis at a time. This is a fairly touchy lineup, and I want it to be just right. So I'm using the handles. That's getting pretty close. Okay, well that's close enough for horseshoes for the moment. Let me just I think I just want to I'm going to use a local axis. I don't normally use a local axis, but I want to move this in position along its rotation axis. So I'm going to switch to local coordinates. That's going to allow me to push this down just slightly. You see the gap in the top is a little larger than the gap in the bottom. And once again, I think there we go. That'll do. I was just going to go for a finer grid size, but that seems to line up well now. And now we can see when we switch to a local coordinate system, we can actually also rotate this on its heading. And it opens and closes very nicely. Now it's going to slam in there. We could, we could just leave it up to an animator to make sure there isn't any intersection there. Or, as a good TD, we could put a limit on it for our artist so that they don't have to trouble themselves and get into dailies or whatever and find intersections. So what we know is that the heading direction, let's just actually I'm going to rig this up differently, because this is one of the things that bugs me about local coordinates is that I'm doing a rotation on heading, but you can see, watch down here, as I'm rotating, you can see that the multiple axes are rotating. It's because it's doing the real parent coordinates of rotation. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to put our coordinates back to 0, 0, 0. All of our headings, and I'm going to put a null in between the hatch and the body. I'm going to rotate the null so the door always maintains its proper heading. So here's how I'm going to do that. I'll open up my scene editor. I'll go items, add a null. I'll just call it rotate parent, and I'm going to move this null. I'm going to parent it to the hinge. Then I'm going to parent the hatch to the null. And let's look at where everything is positioned now. And now, because I had moved this into position, I actually need to zero it out again so that it's positioned where the null is. And now I need to grab the null object, rotate parent, and I need to move it into position. So we're going back and we're starting basically where I did with the hatch. And instead of moving the hatch itself, I'm simply moving the null. So once again, we'll take that right-hand view, and you'll see where I'm going with this. As soon as this is all set up, you'll understand exactly where I'm going with it. Rotate that and move it into position. I'm going to take the back view and get it a little bit closer into position here. That's pretty near. Take the right view again. Rotate it so that it's about right again. Okay, let's have a look at that in perspective view and see if it's working out for us. Not quite. It's a slight rotation in bank. That feels good enough for now. Okay, now I want to make sure this thing is not selectable. Pretty easy, open my scene editor and unlock it. And just to make sure it's extra good, I'll make it hidden as well. So, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. It was the rotate parent. I want to make it hidden as well, so that people can't select it, and they can't even see it. So now, when I grab my hatch, just grab it right out of here, and I go to rotate it, you'll notice that its rotation axes are perfectly in line. And I can go into my normal parent coordinate system, and you can see that the heading rotation handle is correctly oriented. And when I rotate the heading, only the heading down here changes in rotation. So putting the null in between and rotating the null allows the all the axes of the hatch to remain zeroed out. And now I can properly put a limit on this rotation, to make sure that it doesn't go inwards past 0. So we don't want it to go into the positive heading. We want it to stay negative. And let's pick a negative maximum here. So let's see where we want this to go to. Probably no further than negative 170. Let's call it negative 177. So I'm going to open the motion options for this guy. And I'm going to go to controllers and limits. And I'm going to say there are heading limits. And the maximum is negative 177 and the minimum is 0. So you can see that it won't go in past 0 and it won't go out past 177. So people can't make that mistake, and it doesn't, they don't have to go through the hassle of figuring all that out. Now we also don't want this window, or I'm sorry, we also don't want this hatch to rotate along its bank axis or its pitch axis, obviously. So again, we'll just turn those off, so they're not even available. We do want our little handle to be able to rotate, so let's pick that. Let's pick that out of our scene editor. That's our little handle there. We don't want it to move, so we're going to turn those off. Oh, but look, we have a problem. The pivot point of our rotation handle is not properly centered. So there's two ways we can deal with this. We can go back into Modeler and move our object so that it is properly centered in the axis, or we can move the pivot point of the handle. And in this case, that's probably the easiest thing to do. So let's go into wireframe mode, and we'll pick a back view, and it is also parented. So probably the easiest thing for us to do is do this from a number of views. Go to the right view, push this out and make sure it's really well centered. Although it might be funny if it wobbled a little bit when it rotated. Right, top, center on our selection. Check front view. That looks not too bad. Let's just try rotating that and see what happens. Yeah, actually I kind of like that little bit of wobble. So it's not perfectly centered. That doesn't really bother me. That gives it a little bit of fun character. So I'm actually going to leave that, and I am not going to put any rotation limits on that. However, I do want it to only rotate in bank. So I'll turn off heading and pitch. I'll turn off movement. I'll turn off scale. I should actually do that with the hatch too. Make sure to turn off scale and movement. And that's our hatch set up and ready to go. Of course, it is wise after you've done a few minutes of work to save your scene. So we'll save this scene as, in our content rocket ship scenes, we'll save it as rocket ship, rocket underscore ship 001. So that's our first version of the scene. Okay, so we've rigged up our wings, our hatch. What else do we have moving? The only thing left moving is the gear legs. So we're going to do a similar approach. We're going to parent the gear leg to a null and then rotate it into position. And then after that, we're going to clone that around. We'll parent a foot to it, and then we'll clone that around. So let's get to that. I'm going to go to a right view. Let's go into wireframe. And let us open our scene editor and find our gear leg. There it is. So it's up inside. Actually, let's look at the front view. So it's up inside there. Its pivot is way up here. That's actually not awesome. So let's add a null object. Items. Add a null. Gear leg. Rotate parent. It is really worthwhile to make sure to properly name your nulls before you begin work. I am not kidding. It's really worth it. You could very easily find yourself getting into some pretty complex rigging and find yourself with 28 object named null, and at some point you'll go crazy and you'll actually have to stop, figure out what they are, and rename them all. So it's very effective with your time to simply go to the trouble of naming them all as you move along. So we'll go to our scene editor. Again, we're going to parent our gear leg to our new null. But first, the gear leg rotate parent needs to be parented to the body. And then the gear leg will be parented to the null. There it is. So our setup is ready. The first thing we probably want to do is grab our gear leg and move it way up so that it's close to the... Actually, no. You know what? This is not right. This pivot point of this gear leg is so far out of position that I really feel I need to go back into Modeler and fix it. So let's do that. The gear leg is way down, way down. So let's get that in a more reasonable position. So just save us hassle later. Just move it into position, S to save, all done. And then when we go back into layout, there it is. That's better. So now we can move our null, gear leg rotate parent. And maybe while we're at it, we should just move our foot down here so it's roughly in position. We'll fine position it later. Okay, so we have to figure out what this angle is going to be. And it's going to be a bank angle. Kind of need to eyeball it to get those all lined up. Does that look right? That looks pretty right to me. And let's go into our shaded solid and perspective view to take a look at it to see how it's working here. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. The axis, the rotation axis of the foot is along the wrong way. So I think we quickly need to jump back into Modeler, rotate that stuff 90 degrees so it comes out just right. We could just rotate the null 90 degrees right now, and that would solve the problem. But that would be an extra complexity that might be confusing down the road. So what I prefer to do right now is simply go into Modeler, grab the gear leg and the gear foot, and we're simply going to rotate them on the y-axis 90 degrees right now. Numeric to make sure it's perfect. Angle is going to be 90 degrees. Axis is going to be y. Center is going to be 0, 0, 0. Apply. Save it. By the time we get back to layout, it'll be there. Bink. And now it'll be really simple to properly position our foot. So let's go ahead and zoom in there and get our foot up into the right position. Looks pretty good. Just a little bit higher. Get a finer grid size in there. There we go. Very nice. And now we want to know what angle to rotate it back. Well, if this is going to be on a flat surface, it should be the opposite angle of the rotation, the bank rotation of the parent. So let's look. We have negative 28.4 degrees. So logically, this should bank 28.4 degrees. There, now it's perfect. Now, there's always a possibility we could add expressions to this so that it slightly rotates as it lifts off or whatever. We don't know, so we're not going to actually do that right now. We have one leg rigged up, and now what we want to do is we want to add that to the other 3 strut ends. Okay, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to re-rigging things over and over again. So I like to find quicker ways to do it. And here's how I might approach something like this. I have one leg and foot set up, positioned exactly where I want it. And I want to find a really easy way to get that in 3 more times. So here's a way I might do that. I might add another null and just call it gear center. And I might parent that to the body. And I might take my rotate parent and parent that to the gear center. Now, since the rocket body and gear center are both centered, all the landing gear remains in exactly the same position. It's just got one more item in the middle of it. Now, what I could do is simply do load items from scene. Load items from scene. Actually, first I have to save this scene. Save it. Overwrite. Then I'll go File, Load items from scene. This scene is going to ask me which items I want to load. And what I want to load is not the body, not the hinge, not the hatch, not the hatch handle. I don't want to load any of the wings. I do want the gear leg, gear foot, rotate parent. Not the rotate parent, that's for the hatch. The gear leg, rotate parent, and the gear center. Those are the only items that I want to load from scene. I'm just going to double check to make sure nothing else is getting loaded here. So just those 4 items, the leg, the foot, and the 2 nulls. So I'm going to load that. Now I have a second set. Right here. You'll notice. So now I have a whole second set of gear. Watch what I can do by taking that center gear and simply rotating it on heading 90 degrees. Ta-da! We have a second set of gear. And do the same thing again. Load items from scene. Rocket ship. And again, I only want 4 items. Those 4 items. Okay, and I'm going to do it again. File, load items from scene one more time. Same thing. Ooh, I want gear leg. Okay, looking back in my scene editor, I have 2 more sets of this. I don't really need to open it up. I could just set its heading to 180. And I can grab this one and set its heading to 270. Now I have 4 gear legs. They're all rigged up and ready to roll. Now I have to do some careful locking of things that I do not want people to rotate and touch. So first of all, I want to make sure all my gear centers do not ever get touched, because that could really mess me up. So those all need to be locked. My gear leg parents, also same thing. Those nulls are just for positioning purposes. We don't want anybody messing with them. They get locked. I also like to leave things that are locked and untouchable as black. And I like to change everything else to a more sensible color. Actually, you could just multi-select these, change your color. And then for now I can just collapse these back down to simplify how my scene is looking, and I notice when I'm collapsing these down, that these gear centers all need to be parented to the body. So I'm just going to go and drop those on the rocket body. Now they're in the same hierarchical position as all of the other legs, otherwise the body would fly away and the landing gear would stand there, and of course that would be no good. So there we've got our landing gear, hinge, wings are parented to the body. So our initial rig is done. The last thing we need to do in rigging is, of course, give it a little test. I'll close the window here. In perspective view here, let's just make sure things are working. So, for example, I could grab both of these guys together and rotate them. Or I could grab either one. It's all working. Really simple, can't accidentally rotate it the wrong way. I can grab this leg and I can move it in and out. Oh, look at that. Okay, so there's a problem. I only want to be able to move these gear legs on their y-axis. So I only want them coming in and out. Obviously, I don't want them doing this. So let's fix that right now. Once again, the scene editor is the fastest place to do this. We need to expand our gear legs. And we need to grab all of our legs here. And make sure that only the Y position is on. That worked. And they are not rotating or scaling at all. So we'll go back and make sure that is all off as well. Rotation should be off. Scaling should be off. And for foot, we only want rotation along the bank axis. So let's select all our feet, and we'll turn off all axes except bank. So heading and pitch goes off, all the translation goes off, and all the scaling goes off. Okay. This is where testing reveals all the little things that you forgot to do, and that's a very good thing. Alright, so whenever we grab our gear leg and move it, it's only going to move up and down now. Do we want to put a down limit? I think we might. We might want to put an up limit as well. So let's see. Our up limit might be, let's say 58 millimeters, and our down limit should be, say, -9 millimeters. So this is a Y position limit. So I think just for simplicity I'll make it 60 millimeters and 0. So the minimum will be 0 and the maximum will be 0.06. So let's see how that works. Perfect. 0 and 0.06. I'll just enable that on the other gear legs. 0.06. I'll do the other two and I'll be right back. Okay, so now all three of my gear legs are limited to their up and down motion. That's good. And I think we're probably going to need to do the same thing with our feet, because they can, of course, rotate pretty crazy right now. We don't like that. So let's see if we can figure out our angle limits for that. So let's say something like, I better look inside there to make sure there's no crashing. It's actually pretty good. Let's say 75 and, well, what? 75 and let's say -75. That's pretty straight ahead. So, once again, motion options. This time it's going to be rotation, a bank limit from -75 to 75. So now you can even see the nice limits in the handle. That works great. I'll do the other three and I'll be right back. Okay, now we can see that all of these have their limits together. And we can grab all of our legs, see that they have all their limits together. And rotation limits up and down. That's pretty good. And our door has its rotation limit. Let's grab that door hatch, rather. Rotation limits. And we probably need rotation limits for our wings as well, I would imagine. Let's decide what's reasonable there. Nah, you know what? I don't want to put rotation limits on though. There's nothing in the way. There's nothing that they're going to hit or intersect with. I don't think rotation limits are needed on there, and that gives us a little bit more fun animation potential, and that's always good thinking. All right. So that covers it for rigging. We're going to move on to, we're going to put some basic lighting in next, and we're going to start texturing this little rocket ship.